We begin by pondering a Tu B'Shvat scene in Israeli cinema. Salach Shabati was one of the first Israeli films to achieve international acclaim. A biting comedy, the movie skewers the Ashkenazi socialist elite that was in charge of Israel in its early years. The movie stars the actor Topol, of Fiddler on the Roof fame, as a Sephardic immigrant to Israel. Shabati encounters hardships at every turn and emerges in the movie as a Jobian figure decrying the injustices of his experience. His very name is a pun on the phrase Slicha Shabati, I'm sorry I came. Stationed on a kibbutz, Shabati is given the job of planting saplings, setting the stage for a forest that is yet to be. As the workers labor in the dirt, the bureaucrat in charge at the kibbutz prepares to welcome wealthy American donors. Though the film does not say, we can deduce the time of year this would have taken place. On the 15th day of the Jewish month of Shvat, known as Rosh Hashanah LaIlanot, the Jewish New Year for trees. Since 1908, the Jewish National Fund had dedicated the day to planting new trees in the land. And it was on or around this date that American Jewish donors would have arrived to engage in this tree planting ritual. Right before the American Jews pull up in their chauffeured luxury vehicle, the bureaucrat installs a sign that boldly proclaims, "Here will be the Jacob Birnbaum Forest, Yar Yaakov Berenboim." Mr. Birnbaum arrives, he takes a picture, and he leaves. And then, as he pulls away, and the car of another American Jew pulls up, the bureaucrat pulls out the sign that he has just installed and replaces it with another. And this sign reads, "Here will be the Pearl Sonnenstein Forest, Yar Pearl Sonnenstein," or something like that. Shabati looks and he says, "What are you doing? Why are you replacing the signs?" And the bureaucrat says, "Kol echad rotzeh yar bishvilo." Every one of the American Jews wants their own forest with their own name on it. So he says, "Aval ze sheker, this is dishonest. You're making each one think that the forest is named exclusively after him or her." Mrs. Sonnenstein gets out of her car to see what she assumes is now her forest, and is shocked to discover Shabati running around uprooting all the saplings that have just been planted. The bureaucrat runs over to him and he says, "What are you doing?" And Shabati replies, all the saplings in hand, "Ze hayar shel Yaakov Berenboim." This is Birnbaum's forest. Pearl Sonnenstein needs a different forest for herself. Shabati is, of course, immediately mifutar, fired, and the scamming of American donors continues apace. The film captures a moment in the tale of modern Israel, and it allows us to appreciate the country's transformation over the past 70 years. It has gone from a hardscrabble third world nation reliant on American philanthropy to a technological and agricultural powerhouse whose achievements in irrigation are now being applied all over the world. But the scene also serves as a metaphor for Tu B'Shvat itself. As we shall soon see, the development of this holiday was originally about the rootedness of Jewish identity, how every one of us is defined and obligated by our past, by ties to a nation and by a link to a land. And with this rootedness comes an obligation to the future. Today, however, Tu B'Shvat has, for many, come to embody the opposite, the embrace of the zeitgeist. To paraphrase the bureaucrat from Salach Shabati, today when it comes to Tu B'Shvat, Kol echad rotzeh yar bishvilo. Everyone wants his own forest, his own celebration of trees, often one unconnected to Jewish identity, uprooted from the Jewish past, unmoored from the values that Judaism holds dear. There is so much about Tu B'Shvat that is wondrous, even miraculous. and there is also much about its modern mode of celebration that is now a cause for dismay. Rightly understood, the tale of the evolution of Tu B'Shvat is both an embodiment of the undying Jewish love for the Holy Land, but also of the rootless crisis of identity that marks much of modern Jewish life in our age. We must first and foremost appreciate and understand that Tu B'Shvat was for much of Jewish history not a holiday at all. In the Talmud, the 15th of Shvat marks nothing more than one in a series of halachic deadlines related to the obligation to offer tithe portions of the year's crops to the Levites who served in the temple. For fruits in particular, the end of one fiscal year and the beginning of the next was marked by Tu B'Shvat, the 15th day of the Hebrew month of Shvat. This date was chosen by the house of Hillel because in the Middle East, fruit trees begin to bloom at around this time, months before the actual arrival of spring. Thus, a farmer in the land of Israel would tithe, say, his pomegranate crop by taking 10% separately from every collection of fruit that had bloomed between 1/15 of Shvat and the next. That is all Tu B'Shvat was, for millennia, a Jewish legal version of what the 1st of January is for many of us today, a cutoff for taxes. How then did this embodiment of rabbinic legality become a festival of fruit? The laws of tithing, according to the Talmud, apply only to produce grown in the Holy Land. They are known in Jewish law as mitzvot hatluyot ba'aretz, biblical commandments that are, rightly understood, a reflection of the holiness of the land of Israel and of the fruits that were nurtured by its sacred soil. Thus, these obligations of tithing only apply to fruits that were grown in the Holy Land itself. After the expulsion from the land, marking Tu B'Shvat became a way of connecting to Eretz Yisrael, to the homeland of the Jewish people. It was a form of celebrating the land's sanctity and of remembering the botanical specimens that figure in the Bible. The celebration began centuries after the expulsion, and like many of our traditions today, its origins lie in the 16th century mystical circle of Tzefat, Safed, in northern Israel. The Kabbalists there composed their own liturgy and created a series of rituals for the day, which became known as a Tu B'Shvat Seder, paralleling that of Passover. But matzah was replaced with produce, and the 4 cups of wine progressed from lighter to darker vintages, symbolizing the 4 seasons, beginning with white wine representing winter and concluding with a deep red, representing the abundance of the harvest season. The holiday spread throughout the Jewish world, and though Seders of this sort were marked throughout the centuries, it never became normative. Rather, Jews in their own environs partook in fruits that in some way reminded them of the land of Israel. Among Sephardim living on the Mediterranean, the day became known in Ladino as Las Frutas, featuring celebrations centering on the 7 species of fruit for which the land of Israel was biblically known, such as grapes, figs, pomegranates, olives, and dates. For Ashkenazic Jews experiencing Tu B'Shvat in the frigid winters of Eastern Europe, the Jewish connection to the Holy Land was reified by their eating any fruit they could get their hands on that had once grown from a tree rooted in the sacred soil of the land of Israel itself, whose produce had made its way all the way to their own environs. It is for this reason that for Orthodox Jews of many generations, including my own, Tu B'Shvat became embodied by the eating of one fruit in particular, the carob, whose name derives from the Hebrew charuv, and whose Yiddish name, by which we all knew it, Boxer, is short for the German word Boxhornbaum, the tree with ram's horn-shaped fruit. And ladies and gentlemen, we must not mince words. In the dried version that generations of Jews experienced it, this fruit was disgusting. As the language columnist known as Philologos once put it, these carobs were flattish, irregularly curved, serrated along the edges, 4 to 6 inches in length, hard as nails to bite into, and yield, if you haven't meanwhile broken all of your teeth, a mealy substance that has been described as smelling like Limburger cheese. End quote. There is no question, ladies and gentlemen, that the Boxer has long been native to the Holy Land. Carob cultivation is ancient and has always existed in abundance in the Middle East. And carob seeds have been found in archaeological sites from Jericho and Haifa that date back to the Neolithic period. In fact, I'm pretty sure that the carob that I ate as a child came from the Neolithic period. Yet, while the Bible celebrates the 7 species and Rabbinic Judaism adores the etrog, nary a mention is made of the carob in the Bible, though it was undoubtedly a fruit with which the Holy Land was botanically abundant. The reason for it not being celebrated in the Bible is that the carob does not taste very good at all. Confirming our own culinary intuition, the Talmud states several times that carob is ma'achal behema, animal food. And if, despite this, Ashkenazic Jews ate the Boxer on Tu B'Shvat, it was because it was the only way during their winter to connect to the land that they loved. Rabbi and chef Gil Marx notes that, quote, in the days before quick transport and refrigeration, the carob's hard, dry texture made it one of the few fruits grown in the land of Israel capable of withstanding long-distance shipping without spoilage, and therefore was available to Ashkenazim, end quote. In other words, the desire to partake from the fruit of the Holy Land was so strong for these Jews that it made them willing even to eat Boxer. And indeed, they more than tolerated it. They devoured it. Rabbi Beryl Wine, who, like me, grew up and celebrated Tu B'Shvat in the Arctic tundra known as Chicago, Illinois, recalls that, quote, the Boxer was hard as rock and tasteless as wood. Yet I noticed, he writes, that my parents, Jews of an earlier generation who were born before there was a state of Israel, or a time when free and open worship was really allowed at the Western Wall without Arab or government interference, ate their pieces of Boxer slowly and with great affection. Only later in my life did I realize, he continues, that eating that piece of Boxer validated their hope and belief that the land of Israel would yet flourish and grow under Jewish sovereignty, and that the vineyards and orchards of the land promised to us by our prophets would become abundant reality. Tu B'Shvat, then, rightly understood, reflected for Jews the tree-like nature of human existence, the rootedness of the Jewish national identity. We moderns often assume that identity is not predetermined in any way, that it is totally malleable, that it can be shed and replaced like a suit of clothes, that we can be whomever we wish to be. And to a certain extent, that may be true, but taken to an extreme, however, such an attitude, Judaism insists, denies human nature itself. In one fascinating verse forbidding the wanton destruction of fruit trees, Deuteronomy introduces an interesting analogy. Ki ha'adam eitz hasadeh, it informs us, for man is akin to a tree in the field. In the interpretation of Rabbi Joseph Soloveichik, this seemingly strange comparison suggests precisely that man, much like a tree, is in fact integrally connected with his roots, and indeed at least partially defined by them. And here, ladies and gentlemen, another aspect of the carob of the holy Boxer reveals itself. Because the carob, says the Talmud, has longer roots than most other Israelite trees, and, in a parallel way, to eat its fruit was thus for Jews in the diaspora to extend their roots back to the Holy Land, to link themselves with its soil and with a heritage far away, with an identity impervious to the often inimical forces of their surrounding environment. Thus, what is known today as the Jewish Festival of Trees is rightly understood actually about the tree-like nature of Jewish existence, of the rootedness of Jewish identity in the Holy Land itself. My fellow Midwesterner Rabbi Beryl Wine was right. The celebration of Tu B'Shvat validated the hopes and the beliefs of generations of Jews, even if they lived frigid existences in Lithuania, Poland, or Chicago, Illinois, that the Holy Land would yet flourish and grow once again under Jewish sovereignty, and that the vineyards and orchards of the land promised to us by the prophets would one day again become abundant reality. And so it was. The hopes and dreams of the creators of Tu B'Shvat and their celebrations have been vindicated. Imagine, if you will, a community of Jewish mystics in the Galil, living in the north of Israel, in Tzfat, sitting at a Tu B'Shvat Seder, at a time of year when the trees were shorn of leaves, when the wind was fierce, and when even in the Middle East, the mountains in the north might have been capped with the whiteness of snow. The season perfectly paralleled what was then the winter of Jewish history. For all over Israel at the time, the land lay frigid and fallow. The orchards were empty, and the Holy Land's cities, including Jerusalem, had few Jews. And so they sat at this Seder, they sipped white wine, and pondered the fact that underneath the whiteness of winter, deep within the ground, the rain was gathering, the trees were beginning to bud, and spring was preparing to arrive. And they hoped and they prayed that so too, in a similar sense, the Jewish love and loyalty for Eretz Yisrael was laying the groundwork for an age when the bitterness of their own generation would end, when the spring of Jewish history would arrive, when we would once again work lovingly in the Holy Land and obey the Torah's agricultural observances, such as tithing of fruit, when we would experience the fulfillment of Isaiah's exclamation and prediction, Ki nicham Hashem Tzion, for God has consoled Zion, Vayasa midbara ke'eden, v'arvata kegan Hashem, and transformed its desert into an Eden, its wilderness into a garden of God. And so they sat at the Seder and they proceeded from white wine to shades of red, praying for a time when the winter of history would end, when Jewish life in the Holy Land would bloom and blossom, flower and flourish, when the fields would be full of grain, the orchards with etrogim and oranges, and even the deserts themselves would defy our expectations and emerge into Edens, culminating in an extraordinary and lush autumn in the celebration of Sukkot, when Jews from all over the world would converge on Jerusalem and partake in the harvest of the Holy Land. Today, however, for much of world Jewry, rather than embodying a link to a land and to a people, Tu B'Shvat has become a sort of Jewish Earth Day, celebrating the environment and marking an embrace of the zeitgeist. This tragic phenomenon was masterfully documented by my friend Tevi Troy in a wonderful article in Commentary bearing the delightful title, I Think That I Shall Never See, A Jew is Lovely as a Tree. As Tevi notes in his piece, Tu B'Shvat has been cited by Jews and Jewish groups to advance opposition to fracking, the importance of eating locally grown foods, reducing one's carbon footprint, and exploring why Jews should be vegans or at the very least vegetarians. American synagogues today have seized on this holiday as an opportunity for communal service to the environment. And moreover, as Tevi notes, long before any of the modern Tu B'Shvat observances emerges, Judaism was and remains an environmentally friendly religion. But its view of the environment is based in the sense of responsible individual stewardship and in the goodness of creation. But modern Tu B'Shvat observances, not to mention environmental activist groups, mostly see man as the problem. Tevi's point, as he notes, is not that individual environmental programs are bad or problematic in and of themselves. The question at stake, he writes, is whether linking a Jewish observance to these modern values is a good thing for Judaism. After all, he argues, if one just wanted to help the environment, one could join an environmental group. Keeping Jews engaged on a religious level requires the maintenance of something that is authentically Jewish, not something that has been grafted on. Judaism, he writes, is not and should not be trendy. It has withstood intellectual assaults dating back to the ancient Greeks by sticking to its traditions. In doing so again and again, Judaism has outlived many an ancient civilization. by aiming to follow the ways of the Torah. In contrast, Tevi concludes, a Judaism that tethers itself to the culture around it and worships the idols of the day detaches itself from its deepest convictions and heralds an uncertain future. He is right. And I couldn't help but note myself that even the website of the Jewish National Fund, which had for so long focused Tu B'Shvat on the botanical specimens of the Holy Land, now informs us that, quote, Tu B'Shvat embodies the abiding dedication to ecology, environmentalism, and conservation that JNF has always championed. Now, conservation can be important, but Tu B'Shvat has never had anything to do with ecology, environmentalism, or conservation. The cruel irony is that a holiday which was once all about Jewish identity, rootedness, a link to a particular land, is now all too often about something else entirely. It is still about trees in an amorphous way, but all too often its celebrants in the here and now forget the Bible's teaching that we are akin to a tree in the field, which means that as Jews we flourish first and foremost when we recognize our roots and the land that has spiritually sustained us throughout our existence as a people. At its best, however, the story of this holiday reflects something extraordinary, the miracle of Jewish existence, of the loyalty and love for the Holy Land manifested by generations of Jews, and of the miracle that is Israeli agriculture today, which is a vindication of that love and a fulfillment of biblical prophecy in our time. In Tanakh, in the Bible, in describing the eventual destruction of the Jewish polity by its enemies, promises that v'ha'aretz tiyeh shmama, that with the people of Israel exiled from the Holy Land, the soil itself would remain barren. And indeed, empire after empire, from Rome to Byzantium, from the Christian West to the Muslim East, invested blood, toil, and treasure into the land of Israel. But what emerged from the land itself? As late as the 19th century, Mark Twain visited the Holy Land and described what he saw. The hills, he wrote, are barren. They are dull of color. They are unpicturesque in shape. The valleys are unsightly deserts tinged with a feeble vegetation that has an expression about it of being sorrowful and despondent. The Dead Sea and the Sea of Galilee sleep in the midst of a vast stretch of hill and plain, wherein the eye rests upon no pleasant tint, no striking object, no soft picture dreaming in a purple haze or mottled with the shadows of the clouds. Every outline is harsh, every feature is distinct. There is no perspective. Distance works no enchantment here. It is a hopeless, dreary, heartbroken land. So it was, but no longer. On February 14th, 1949, according to the Jewish calendar, on the 15th day of the month of Shvat, Israel's Knesset convened for the first time. On the way to the assembly, David Ben-Gurion paused at Shar Hagai, the road to Jerusalem also known as Bab el-Wad, where just 1 year before so many had died in attempting to break the Arab siege of Jerusalem. There, as captured in a famous photo, Ben-Gurion planted a sapling. The image marks not only the miracle of the restoration of Jewish sovereignty, but also of how, in the Jewish return, the land all of a sudden was endowed with potential once again. Look at what has occurred. Prophetic verses have come true in our time. God has, at least partially, consoled Zion. He has made its desert into an Eden, its wilderness into a garden of God. And with an appreciation of this miracle must come a reverence for the love and the faith of generations past, and also a feeling of obligation to pass on all they believed on to our posterity. In Perpetuation, Leon Cass once wrote, "We send forth not just the seed of our bodies, but also the bearer of our hopes, our truths, and those of our tradition. If our children are to flower, we need to sow them well and nurture them, cultivate them in rich and wholesome soil, clothe them in fine and decent opinions and mores, and direct them toward the highest light, to grow straight and tall, that they may take our place, as we took that of those who planted us and made way for us, so that in time they too may make way and plant." Never has the Jewish festival of the Holy Land's trees been more meaningful, and never has it been more misunderstood. We owe those who came before a Tu B'Shvat worthy of their faith and of our future. Thank you very much. I'm Meir Soloveichik. If you enjoyed this lecture, please be sure to sign up for future updates and subscribe to our YouTube channel. Thank you for watching.